It was October of the year 1955. The Mojave Desert lay flat and colorless beneath a sun that burned white-hot against a pale sky. The air shimmered above the concrete runway, bending light into liquid waves that made the horizon look like it was breathing. There was no wind, just heat, dry and absolute, pressing down on everything like a weight you couldn't see but could feel in your lungs. Bill Mitchell stood beside the aircraft, one gloved hand resting against the fuselage. The metal was hot enough to hurt through the leather. He didn't pull away. The plane, sleek, needle-nosed, painted silver, like a bullet made of light, sat on the tarmac with its landing gear locked, its canopy open, its engine cowlings still warm from the pre-flight checks. It looked alive, dangerous, beautiful, in the way a loaded gun is beautiful. He ran his hand along the seam where the wing met the body, feeling the faint vibration of cooling metal, the ping and tick of aluminum contracting in the heat. Somewhere inside the airframe, hydraulic fluid hissed through pressurized lines. The smell of it, sweet, chemical, vaguely poisonous, mixed with the scent of jet fuel and hot rubber. His crew chief, a man named Torres, with grease under his fingernails and a cigarette tucked behind his ear, stood 20 feet away, watching him. "She's ready," Torres said. Bill didn't answer. He was looking at the intake, the way the morning light reflected off the polished steel, the way the nose cone tapered to a point so sharp it could cut paper. He thought about the airspeed indicator inside the cockpit, the needle that would climb past numbers most pilots never saw. He thought about the flutter tests, the wind tunnel data, the cracks they'd found in the tail assembly after the last test flight. They'd welded them shut, reinforced the spars, ran the calculations again. It should hold. Should. "Mr. Mitchell," Torres said again, quieter this time, "you don't have to do this." Bill turned. His face was expressionless, tanned and lined from years of standing in desert sun, watching other men climb into planes he'd designed. His eyes were pale blue, the kind of blue that looked gray in certain light. He was 41 years old and looked 50. "Yes," he said, "I do." He climbed the ladder. 9 years earlier, in the winter of 1946, Bill Mitchell sat in a cramped office inside the Army Air Force's research facility in Dayton, Ohio. Snow fell outside the window, soft and silent, accumulating on the sill. The room smelled like burnt coffee and cigarette smoke. A single overhead bulb cast harsh shadows across the drafting table, where Bill hunched over a blueprint, a grease pencil in one hand, a cup of cold coffee in the other. The blueprint showed an aircraft fuselage, standard issue, conventional, safe. Bill hated it. He drew a line through the tail section, then another through the wing mounts. He sketched a new shape, thinner, sharper, built for speed instead of stability. The angles were aggressive, the proportions strange. It looked less like an airplane and more like a knife. Behind him, someone cleared their throat. Bill didn't turn around. "Mitchell," the voice said. It belonged to Colonel Harris, a man with a square jaw and a clipboard who believed in regulations, the way some men believed in God. What are you doing? Redesigning the P-80, Bill said. We didn't ask you to redesign the P-80. I know. Harris stepped closer, looked at the blueprint, frowned. That won't fly. It will? It's unstable. It's fast. Harris sighed, the way a teacher sighs at a student who won't listen. Mitchell, we need aircraft that can be flown by average pilots, not just test jockeys, not just you. Bill set down the greased pencil. He turned, finally, and looked at Harris. Speed is everything now, he said quietly. The war's over. The Russians have jets. The Germans had jets. If we don't build something faster, we're already behind. Harris shook his head. You're obsessed. I'm right. Harris left the blueprint on the table, rejected, and walked out. Bill stayed. He stared at the design for another hour, then started sketching again. Because to him, drag wasn't a problem of physics. It was a problem of imagination. And if no one else could see it, he'd just have to show them. He worked through the night. The coffee went cold. The cigarettes burned down to filters. Outside, the snow kept falling. Bill Mitchell was not born brilliant. He was born stubborn. He grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania, in a house that smelled like motor oil and sawdust. His father, Frank, worked at a locomotive factory. His mother, Margaret, kept the books for a hardware store downtown. Bill was the middle child, quiet and odd, the kind of kid who took apart alarm clocks to see how they worked and couldn't put them back together. He didn't play sports. He didn't have many friends. What he had was a notebook, a small black one with lined pages, and he filled it with sketches. Bridges, machines, wings. He was obsessed with wings. The way they curved, the way air moved over them, the way a bird could hang motionless in the wind, suspended by invisible forces. When he was 12, he built a wooden glider in his backyard. It didn't fly. It crashed into the fence and broke into pieces. His father laughed, not unkindly, and said, "Maybe stick to trains, kid." But Bill rebuilt it, changed the angle of the wings, adjusted the weight distribution, tried again, and again. By the time he was 14, the glider could stay airborne for 20 seconds. By 16, he'd built one that could carry a sandbag. He went to engineering school on a scholarship, studied aeronautics, graduated near the top of his class. But he wasn't the top. He was too strange, too focused, too willing to argue with professors about airflow equations. He didn't get the prestigious jobs after graduation. He got the Army Air Forces, a desk in Dayton, and a stack of blueprints no one wanted to look at. That was fine. He didn't need them to look. He just needed them to let him work. In the spring of 1947, Bill's first real design, an experimental interceptor he'd named the XF-91, was approved for testing. It was small, fast, and according to the test pilots, terrifying. The control surfaces were too sensitive. The airframe shuddered above Mach 0.9. The landing gear collapsed on the second test flight. But it was fast. Bill stood on the tarmac at Muroc Army Airfield, later renamed Edwards, watching as the test pilot, a captain named Voss, climbed out of the cockpit, pale and sweating. "That thing wants to kill me," Voss said. "Did you hit Mach 1?" Bill asked. Voss stared at him. "No. I hit Mach 0.94, and it tried to rip itself apart." "But it didn't." "No, but it wanted to. Bill wrote that down in his notebook. Wants to. Alive." Voss shook his head. "You're insane, Mitchell." Maybe. But Bill was also learning. He spent the next 6 months redesigning the control systems, adding hydraulic boosters, adjusting the center of gravity. He worked 16-hour days. He slept in the hangar. His wife, a woman named Sarah, whom he'd married in 1944, called him twice a week. He forgot to call back. When the redesigned XF-91 flew again, it hit Mach 0.98. Still not fast enough. Still shaking like it wanted to come apart. But closer. Bill watched from the ground, shielding his eyes against the sun, tracking the white contrail stretched across the blue sky. He thought about the sound barrier, the way pilots described it, like hitting a wall. He thought about walls, and how every wall was just a problem waiting to be solved. He went back to the drafting table. In August of 1949, a test pilot named Eddie Reese died. He was flying a modified version of the XF-91, pushing it past Mach 1 in a shallow dive. At 45,000 feet, the aircraft began to oscillate. Small vibrations at first, then violent shaking. The tail assembly failed. The plane tumbled. Reese ejected, but too late. The canopy struck him during separation. He was dead before he hit the ground. Bill was in the observation tower when it happened. He watched through binoculars as the aircraft disintegrated, pieces spinning away like confetti. He watched the parachute deploy, tangled and useless. He watched the body fall. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, binoculars pressed to his face long after there was nothing left to see. Someone, a technician maybe, or another engineer, put a hand on his shoulder. Bill shrugged it off. He went back to the hangar, sat at his desk, opened his notebook, drew a diagram of the tail assembly, marking the failure point with a red X. Then he started sketching a new design. Sarah called that night. He didn't answer. The military almost canceled the program after Reese's death. There was an investigation, a review board, a long bureaucratic silence. But then the Soviets detonated their first atomic bomb, and suddenly speed wasn't a luxury, it was survival. The Air Force needed interceptors. They needed reconnaissance aircraft. They needed something faster than anything the Russians had. They came back to Bill Mitchell. The new contract called for an aircraft capable of sustained flight at Mach 2.5. The altitude ceiling, 70,000 feet. The timeline, 18 months. Bill's team thought it was impossible. Bill thought it was a starting point. He called the project Starfire. The work consumed him. He moved into a small apartment near the base. One room, one window, a hot plate, and a cot. He ate sandwiches from the commissary. He drank coffee until his hands shook. He filled notebooks with equations, sketches, failure analyses. The walls of his apartment were covered with blueprints, pinned up with thumbtacks, overlapping like the scales of a fish. Sarah drove out to see him once. She stood in the doorway of his apartment, looking at the mess, at him, unshaven, thin, his eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness, and she didn't say anything for a long time. "Bill," she finally said, "you're killing yourself." He looked at her, then back at the blueprints. "I'm close." "Close to what?" "To solving it." She left. He didn't try to stop her. 6 months later, she filed for divorce. He signed the papers without reading them. The Starfire prototype took shape slowly, painfully. The fuselage was built from a new aluminum alloy, lighter and stronger than anything previously used. The engine, a custom-built turbojet with an afterburner that could push 15,000 pounds of thrust, was delivered late and over budget. The wings were thin, swept back at a 45-degree angle, designed to slice through air instead of pushing against it. It looked wrong, unnatural, like something that shouldn't exist. Bill loved it. The first test flight was scheduled for May 1952. A pilot named Jack Ritter, calm and methodical, climbed into the cockpit. The engine spooled up, a rising whine that made the ground vibrate. The aircraft rolled down the runway, slowly at first, then faster. Faster until the nose lifted and the wheels left the ground. Bill watched from the control tower, binoculars pressed to his face, holding his breath. The aircraft climbed smoothly, banking left over the desert. Ritter's voice crackled over the radio. "Starfire 1 is airborne. Controls are responsive. Climbing to 15,000. Bill exhaled. At 20,000 feet, Ritter pushed the throttle forward. The aircraft accelerated. Mach 0.8, Mach 0.9, Mach 1.0, then Mach 1.1. The sonic boom rolled across the desert like thunder. Ritter's voice, tight but steady. "We just broke the barrier. She's smooth. No flutter, no vibration." Bill closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he smiled. But success brought new demands. The Air Force wanted more speed. Mach 2, Mach 2.5, Mach 3. They wanted higher altitudes, longer range, better performance in every measurable category. They wanted the impossible, and they wanted it yesterday. Bill gave it to them. Or tried to. The Starfire 2 was larger, heavier, more powerful. The engine was upgraded, the airframe reinforced, the control systems redesigned. Bill worked 18-hour days, 20-hour days. He slept in the hangar. He stopped shaving, stopped eating regular meals. His hands developed a tremor from too much coffee and too little sleep. His team worried about him. Torres, the crew chief, tried to get him to take a break. "Boss," he said one night, "you look like hell." Bill didn't look up from the blueprint. "I'm fine." "You're not." "I'm close." You keep saying that. Because it's true, Torres sighed. Eddie Reese thought he was close, too. Bill's hand stopped moving. He looked up, his eyes cold. Eddie Reese didn't design the aircraft. I did. And I fixed the problem. Did you? Torres asked quietly. Or did you just make it faster? Bill didn't answer. Torres left. The second prototype flew in October 1954. It reached Mach 2.3 before the engine flamed out at 60,000 feet. The pilot, a young captain named Moss, managed to restart it and bring the aircraft down safely. But the engine had cracked. The turbine blades were warped. The airframe showed stress fractures in 3 places. Bill ordered repairs, upgraded materials, new welds. He ran the calculations again. The aircraft could handle it. It had to. But the Air Force was getting nervous. Too many close calls. Too many failures. They wanted results, but they also wanted pilots who came home alive. Bill pushed harder. He told his team the Air Force was wrong to worry, that fear was the enemy of progress, that if they wanted to touch the edge of space, they had to be willing to risk everything. If the air tears the wings off, he said during one late-night meeting, then we'll learn where they tear. One of his engineers, a quiet man named Kowalski, stood up and walked out. He didn't come back. By the summer of 1955, the Starfire 2 was ready for its final test. The goal, sustained flight at Mach 3, at an altitude of 75,000 feet. The Air Force had assigned their best test pilot, a colonel named Pierce, to fly it. But 2 weeks before the test, Pierce pulled out. He told his commanding officer the aircraft wasn't safe. He said Mitchell had pushed the design too far, that the airframe couldn't handle the stress, that someone was going to die. The Air Force agreed. They grounded the project pending a full review. Bill sat in his office, staring at the notice. His hands were shaking, but not from coffee, from rage, from frustration, from the knowledge that he'd spent 9 years building something extraordinary, and they were going to bury it in paperwork. He picked up the phone, called Torres. "Get the aircraft ready," he said. "Boss, we're grounded." "I know. Get it ready anyway." "What are you doing?" "I'm flying it." Torres was silent for a long moment. Then, "You're not a test pilot. I'm the only one who understands the aircraft. That doesn't mean you should fly it. It means I'm the only one who can." Torres sighed. "When?" "Tomorrow morning, early, before anyone notices. This is insane." "I know." Bill didn't sleep that night. He sat in his apartment, going over the flight plan, checking the numbers, visualizing every step. The takeoff, the climb, the acceleration. The moment when the needle crossed Mach 3 and the world became something no one had ever seen. He thought about Eddie Reese, about the parachute, tangled and useless, about the body falling. He thought about Sarah, about the divorce papers he'd signed without reading, about the life he'd traded for a blueprint. He thought about the aircraft, waiting on the tarmac, its metal skin cooling in the desert night, patient and perfect and ready. At 4 a.m., he dressed. flight suit, gloves, boots. He drove to the base in the dark, the headlights cutting through the empty desert. The guard at the gate waved him through without questions. Torres was already there, standing beside the Starfire 2, smoking a cigarette. He looked confronted, resigned. "You're really doing this," he said. "Yes. If you die, I'm going to be pissed." Bill almost smiled. "Noted." Torres helped him into the cockpit, strapped him in, checked the harness, handed him the helmet. "Good luck, boss," Torres said. Bill nodded. The canopy lowered, sealed with a hydraulic hiss. The world became smaller, quieter. Just him and the machine. He flipped the ignition switches. The engine whined, coughed, caught. The instruments flickered to life. Altimeter, airspeed, fuel, hydraulic pressure. Everything green, everything ready. He pushed the throttle forward. The takeoff was smooth. The aircraft accelerated down the runway, faster and faster, until the nose lifted and the ground dropped away. Bill pulled back on the stick, felt the machine respond, climbing steeply into the pale, pre-dawn sky. At 10,000 feet, he leveled off. Checked the instruments. Everything nominal. He pushed the throttle further. The engine roared. The airspeed indicator climbed. Mach 0.8. Mach 0.9. Mach 1.0. The sonic boom rolled out behind him. A crack of sound that split the silence. He didn't hear it. He was already past it. Mach 1.2. The controls were stiff now, harder to move. The hydraulic boosters whined, compensating. The airframe vibrated, a low hum that traveled through the stick into his hands. Mach 1.5. The desert below was a blur of brown and tan, the horizon a curved line where earth met sky. He climbed higher, 30,000 feet, 40,000. The air was thinner now, the sky darker, the stars were visible even in daylight. Mach 2.0. He felt the heat. Not outside, the air at this altitude was freezing, but inside, from friction, from the metal skin of the aircraft burning as it cut through the atmosphere. The canopy was warm under his gloved hand. Mach 2.5. The controls were barely responding now. The boosters were maxed out, straining. The Vansic felt like it was made of concrete. He had to use both hands to move it. Mach 2.8. His heart was pounding. His breath came in short gasps. The G-forces pressed him into the seat. The world outside the canopy was a dark blur. Stars above, earth below. Nothing in between but speed. Mach 2.9. The vibration was worse now, a rattling that made his teeth ache. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the stick, in the rudder pedals, in the way the aircraft wanted to yaw left. Mach 3.0. The needle touched it, held. For one perfect second, he was flying faster than anyone had ever flown. Faster than sound. Faster than thought. Faster than fear. Then the cabin pressure spiked. An alarm shrieked. Red lights flashed across the instrument panel. The stick went dead in his hands. The aircraft pitched forward, nose down, diving. Bill pulled back. Nothing. The hydraulics had failed. The controls were useless. He was falling. 60,000 feet. 50,000. The aircraft was tumbling now, spinning end over end. The horizon whirled past the canopy. Sky, earth. Sky, earth. Too fast to track. The G-forces slammed him sideways, then forward, then back. His vision tunneled. Gray at the edges, black in the center. 40,000 feet. He reached for the ejection handle. His hand was shaking so badly, he could barely grip it. 30,000 feet. He thought about Eddie Reese, about the parachute, tangled and useless. He pulled the handle. Nothing happened. The ejection system had failed. 20,000 feet. He was going to die. He knew it with absolute certainty. The aircraft was out of control. The ground was rushing up, and there was nothing he could do. But his hands kept moving. Instinct running. Stubbornness. He tried the manual controls, the backup hydraulics, the emergency air system. Nothing worked, but he kept trying. 10,000 feet, and then something, a flicker. The stick moved, just a little. The hydraulics coughed back to life, weak but functional. He pulled back, hard. The nose lifted. The spin slowed. The aircraft shuddered, groaning, the airframe screaming with stress. 5,000 feet. The horizon stabilized. Sky above, earth below. The aircraft was flying again. 2,000 feet. He leveled off. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. But he was alive. He turned it toward the base. The engine was sputtering now, losing power. The fuel gauge was in the red, but he could see the runway. Just 5 miles. He could make it. The landing was ugly. The gear deployed only halfway. The left tire blew on touchdown. The aircraft skidded sideways, throwing up sparks and smoke before finally sliding to a stop at the end of the runway. Fire trucks proceeded toward him. Torres was shouting something through a megaphone. Bill couldn't hear him. His ears were ringing. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He popped the canopy. The morning air rushed in, hot, dry, real. He unbuckled the harness, climbed out, and stood on the wing. Torres was there, staring at him, his face pale. "You crazy son of a bitch," Torres said. Bill nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. They grounded him permanently, revoked his flight clearance, shelved the Starfire program. The review board called it reckless endangerment. The Air Force brass called it gross insubordination. The engineers who'd worked with him called it inevitable. Bill sat through the hearings in silence. He didn't defend himself, didn't argue. When asked why he'd flown the aircraft against orders, he said simply, "Because no one else would." They stripped him of his position, reassigned him to a desk job in procurement. He quit a month later. He spent the next 2 years drifting. Took a job with a civilian contractor. Quit. Took another. Quit again. He couldn't focus. Couldn't sleep. Every night, he dreamed about falling. In 1958, he returned to Erie, moved into his mother's old house. She'd died the year before. The house was empty, quiet, filled with ghosts. He set up a drafting table in the living room. Started sketching again. Not aircraft, bridges, buildings, things that stayed on the ground. But late at night, when the house was silent and the street outside was dark, he'd pull out his old notebooks, the ones from Dayton, from Edwards, from the days when he believed speed could solve everything. He'd flip through the pages, look at the sketches, the equations, the failure analyses, and sometimes, on a clean sheet of paper, he'd start drawing. A new design. Thinner, faster, better. He never finished them, but he couldn't stop starting. In 1963, a young engineer from NASA knocked on his door. The man introduced himself as Dr. Carver. He said he was researching hypersonic flight. He said he'd read about the Starfire program. "I wanted to ask you some questions," Carver said. Bill let him in. They sat at the kitchen table. Carver spread out papers, wind tunnel data, test flight reports, performance curves. "Your design was ahead of its time," Carver said. "The Air Force didn't understand what you were trying to do." Bill shrugged. "It almost killed me. But it worked. You hit Mach 3. No one had done that before. For 10 seconds. Then it fell apart. But you landed it." Bill looked at him. "I got lucky." Carver smiled. "Maybe. But luck doesn't design aircraft that push the edge of what's possible. Brilliance does." Bill didn't answer. He was looking at the papers on the table, at his own diagrams, photocopied and annotated, studied by people he'd never met. "We're building something new," Carver said. "A research program. Hypersonic aircraft. Mach 5, Mach 6, maybe faster. We could use your help." Bill shook his head. "I'm done." "Are you?" Bill didn't answer. Because he didn't know. He didn't take the job, but he started sketching again. Seriously this time. He sent drawings to NASA, to the Air Force, to private contractors. Most ignored him. A few wrote back. In 1967, one of his designs, a delta-winged hypersonic concept, was incorporated into the X-15 program. They didn't credit him, but he saw it in the photographs. The angle of the wings, the shape of the nose. His work refined and perfected by others. He was 53 years old. He lived alone. He had no family, no friends, no one who called on holidays. But when he closed his eyes, he could still feel it, the vibration of the controls, the roar of the engine, the moment when the needle touched Mach 3, and the world became something no one had ever seen. Bill Mitchell died in 1982. A heart attack, quick and quiet. He was 68. His body was found in his house, slumped over the drafting table. On the paper in front of him was a sketch. An aircraft, sleek and impossible, with a note in the margin. Mach 7? The house was sold. The papers were boxed up, donated to an aerospace museum in Ohio. Most of them were never cataloged. They sit in a storage room, forgotten. But one artifact survived. In the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, in a corner of the Milestones of Flight Hall, there's a small silver aircraft suspended from the ceiling. The plaque reads, Experimental Mach Research Aircraft, 1950s. No other details. No designer listed, no pilot named. But if you climb the stairs to the second floor and look down into the cockpit, past the cracked windscreen, past the dusty instrument panel, you might notice something. Faint scratches inside the canopy. Letters carved with a penknife or a screwdriver or something sharp enough to cut through glass. They read, B. Mitchell. People walk past it every day. Tourists, students, children who point at the shiny planes and dream of flying. They don't know the story. They don't know about the engineer who pushed too far, flew too fast, and nearly died proving it was possible. They don't know about the man who traded everything, his marriage, his career, his sanity, for 10 seconds at Mach 3. They don't know that obsession and brilliance are sometimes the same thing. But the aircraft knows. It hangs there, silent and patient, a monument to the edge of what's possible. And if you listen closely, if you stand beneath it in the quiet hours when the museum's nearly empty, you might hear it. The faint ping of cooling metal, the ghost of an engine spooling up, the sound of someone who couldn't stop reaching for the sky.